Oftentimes in a form, we'll want to process a user's choice from a list of radio buttons. And remember from a previous video that radio buttons are mutually exclusive. When one is chosen, the others are unchosen. So I have here a form in which we're asking the user to select their favorite sport, and then they're going to click the Submit button. Let me just execute this so you can see how this operates. So if they choose football, click Submit. Brings up a dialog box as you chose football as your favorite sport. Touchdown, go Cardinals. And I have a blank line in between those two prompts. Same thing if they choose golf. You chose golf as your favorite sport. In the cup, can I play through? And then baseball. You chose baseball as your favorite sport. Play ball, go Diamondbacks. And the other prompts are very similar in nature. So let's take a look at the code in this VB project. I have three variables, all strings, called prompt1, prompt2, and prompt3. And it's those three variables that I'm going to use to create my output in the message box. Prompt1 is going to be that first line. Prompt3 will be that third line. And then prompt2 is simply two carriage returns. I'm using controlchars.crlf and doing two of them. And I'm going to concatenate that between prompt1 and prompt3, and that will give me my blank line between those two. So it's adding two carriage returns. And then the processing of my radio buttons are all taking place within an if-else-if structure. So I'm going to start looking at the very first radio button, which is RB Baseball, and if it is checked, remember checked property is either true or false, so that evaluates to a Boolean expression of being either true or false. I could have said if rbaseball.checked equals true, then, but that's really actually kind of redundant. So if it's true, I'm going to set prompt 1 to you chose baseball as your favorite sport, and prompt 3, play ball, go Diamondbacks. If that's not true, we'll do this else if clause and check to see if they chose basketball or the basketball radio button. If they did, we'll set prompt 1 to you chose basketball as your favorite sport, and prompt 3, shoot for 2, go Suns. If that's not true, then we'll do this else if condition, checking to see if they chose the football radio button. And if they did, we'll set prompt 1 and prompt 3 accordingly. And we do the same thing for the golf radio button, the hockey radio button, and the tennis radio button. And then I do have an else down here that if they chose nothing, because the program starts with no radio button selected, if they just click the submit button initially, they're going to get a message box that says you chose nothing as your favorite sport. And then the third line would be what? You don't like sports? And I'm taking those three prompts and concatenating them in a message box of prompt 1, prompt 2, and prompt 3 together for my prompt and message box, and the title is your selection. So that's how we can handle a series of radio buttons using a if-else-if structure. Here's that same program done with C#, my interface being exactly the same. It runs exactly the same way. I just want to show you the code for the submit button as we've written in C#. So same things I had before. I have my three prompt variables, which are string data type. Instead of the controlchars.crlf, as we saw in VB, in C#, we would use the escape characters of a \n for each carriage return, for each new line. And then I have my else structure, and it's written just like the other one, except there's no then, and we're using our curly brackets. But in each clause, we're looking at setting two prompt variables, prompt 1 and prompt 2, based on the radio button that was selected. Again, once one of these is true, so if they chose RB Baseball, even if they could choose the other radio buttons, this code would not be executed. So if we'd somehow made the radio buttons each in their own group panel, so if they weren't mutually exclusive, the program would still only process one of the radio buttons, because once it hits one true, the other else clauses are ignored. And then the data is being shown in the message box as we're concatenating prompt 1, prompt 2, and prompt 3. Just to demonstrate this as well, let me just run it. So if I chose basketball, click submit. You chose basketball as your favorite sport, shoot for 2, go Suns. We choose hockey. You chose hockey's your favorite sport. Birds cold. Go Coyotes. Now here's the same program again as another Visual Basic project. Same interface, going to function the same way, but I'm going to use a select case structure instead of an if-else and show you how you can handle these different radio button choices using select case. I'm just going to go to my code. So remember that with select case, we don't have multiple comparisons that are taking place in terms of different values. We're looking at one value, which in this case is going to be a variable called my radio button choice. I'm going to convert that to lowercase, and then I'm comparing it to a sequence of cases, baseball, basketball, football, and so forth. And if any one of those are a match, we're going to set the prompt accordingly, and then all the other cases will be skipped once we hit a match. Now, I'm doing the prompt a little bit differently here in that I just have one prompt variable as a string, you chose, and then we have my radio button .choice, whichever radio button they chose. I'm going to take the text of that and convert it to uppercase. And so we'll have you chose, say, baseball as your favorite sport. And then I'm going to concatenate to that my two control chars. So when I add in this third prompt concatenation, that's going to be my third line. It'll look just like it did in the ElseIf structure. Now this my radio button choice is a class level variable. I initially set that as a string data type with a value of nothing. And then every time one of the radio buttons is selected, I'm going to use the value of sender, which tells me which radio button they chose, and I'm handling all of those different radio buttons. And I'm looking at the checked changed event. So that's the key event that we typically program for a radio button or for a checkbox. And so anytime a user checks one of those, the previous button is going to change as far as this check. It's going to become unchecked, and the new one becomes checked in that order. And in order to process this sender, I'm going to do it the same way in C#. I'm going to set a new radio button and have that equal sender, and then I can look at the checked value of that radio button. If it is checked, I'm going to set my radio button choice variable to xyz.text, whatever the text is of that radio button. The reason I did the if xyz.checked is this is also going to trigger for the radio buttons where a button becomes unchecked, and so xyz.checked would be false. There's no reason to process that, even though it wouldn't change the way our program runs. It would just be additional processing that doesn't need to occur. So I'm just going to make sure, I'm just going to handle actually the one that is actually checked. And so every time they choose a button, my radio button choice is going to change, and then when they click submit, we'll take whatever choice they've made. Let's just test this. So again, if I say football, you chose football as your favorite sport, touchdown, go Cardinals. Tennis. You chose tennis as your favorite sport. It's your serve. So you can see it functions exactly the same way, but just another way to program that particular algorithm. And oftentimes, when it comes to programming, there are multiple ways to program something, and largely is the programmer's choice and how he thinks. But you also want to do what's the most efficient. Not really a change in efficiency between select case or if else in this situation, but I do think maybe this is a little more readable. And here now is that same application done in C# using a switch structure, which is comparable to the select case in VB. Interface exactly the same. It runs the exact same way. Let's look at our code. So I have a class level variable like we did in VB of my radio button choice. It's a string data type. Initial value is nothing. And then each time they click the radio button, I'm going to create a new radio button. Take sender, convert it to a radio button. Because sender can be any object, we want to make sure that C# treats it as a radio button. So I'm going to cast it as a radio button by putting xyz equals and radio button in parentheses sender. So sender gets cast to the radio button, and that radio button is then assigned to XYZ. And then I can look at the checked value of XYZ, and if it's true, we're going to set my radio button choice class level variable to the text of XYZ. Then when they click the submit button, we're going to build our prompt string again, saying you chose, and then the uppercase value of my radio button choice as your favorite sport. We'll add in our two carriage returns using \n, \n. And then here's our switch structure. We're going to look at the lowercase value of my radio button choice, and I'm going to compare it first to baseball. If that's a match, we're going to concatenate our prompt string, play ball, go Diamondbacks. And then remember, after each case, we have to have a break. So we're adding a break statement within each case. If baseball is the match, it would ignore all the other cases. If baseball is not a match, we're going to check see if it equals basketball and handle that if it does. If not, we'll look at football. If that's a match, we'll add touchdown, go Cardinals. Otherwise, we'll go on to hockey and so forth. We have a default case down here as well. The prompt in that case would have been you chose nothing as your favorite sport because nothing was our default value. And then our third line of that prompt is going to be what? You don't like sports? And we have a break after that. And then our output is simply handled by messagebox.show, showing our prompt and then the title of your selection. Just so you can see this execute. Let's run it. And if I chose golf, you chose golf as your favorite sport, in the cup, can I play through? And those all worked. Now, as a reminder of how we have all those radio buttons using the same piece of code, we have a sub-procedure named choice made sport that I've written. And then in our design, we can choose each of the radio buttons or choose them all together, go over to the Properties tab, look at the events, and for the checked changed event, we set that to choice made sport. And we can click the drop down and choose our different procedures. So I did that for all 6 of those radio buttons, so all 6 radio buttons are executing the same code. In VB, we can do it the same way, or we can go into the declaration statement for that sub-procedure and add each of those events after the handles clause of that sub-procedure declaration.